The StrutFit Show, bringing retail into the future.
Hello and welcome to the StrutFit Show. I'm your host, Nayyar. I'm also the CEO of StrutFit, where our vision is the same as the vision for this show, to bring retail into the future. Every episode, I'll be joined by a guest who is leading or innovating in some part of the retail spectrum, from design to manufacturing to marketing and even to sales. We'll discuss trends, learnings, and ideas and really try to figure out what the top performers in your field are doing. Along the way, we'll discover some lessons you can apply to your own career and hopefully even have some fun. All right, let's do it.
Hey everyone, welcome to the StrutFit Show. I'm joined here by Bryn Rees.
Reese, nice one, yeah.
Rees.
First time.
Cool. Who is the Director of Digital Content Strategy at IKEA, and you've done a lot of other cool roles. So welcome to the StrutFit Show. The purpose of the show, as I was talking about earlier, is really to break down these silos that you see in retail. There's lots of cool stuff happening in marketing and sales, in retail and product creation, but often it just gets discussed in those circles. So our job here is to try to break down these walls and try to teach people what you've learned. And we're going to start off with some really basic stuff. But first, before I jump into some questions, could you just give us some background about where you are now and perhaps how you got here?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Ang. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to try and work backwards, I guess. I currently live in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I've been here for 4 years this August. I'm currently at IKEA, as you mentioned. Prior to that, I actually moved to Amsterdam to work for Adidas, where again I was in content strategy, working with the wider content strategy team, but I was the one and only content engineer in that team. We may get into what content engineering is in a second, I think, but I'll leave that there for now. Prior to that, I spent a long time in the UK at American Express. So I changed industry in a way. I went from financial services to e-commerce when I moved to Amsterdam. But I've been doing a bunch of stuff before that really sort of fit into it. I've been in the content realms for most of my career now, probably. And prior to sort of getting into the strategy and enablement side of it, I was really heavily into the product and agile and the sort of technology side of it. So I'm a bit of a day walker. I kind of span the worlds and I go between different realms. But yeah, that's kind of where my love for content began, and digital as a general practice. Prior to that, I was actually in the old school world of operations. So I was in call centers and card issuance and risk and control and stuff that sounds completely different to what I'm doing, but weirdly enough, it kind of all comes back around. So yeah, really, really enjoyed that. I grew up in Herefordshire, which is on the Welsh border. You can probably tell from the name, it's a Welsh name. I don't have the accent. I went to a posh school, but they didn't allow accents. I grew up on the Welsh border, spent a lot of time in Wales, at the beach, going to rugby, all the typical Welsh things. Yeah, I'm an avid traveller, avid foodie, and yeah, I guess that's me in a nutshell, probably.
Cool, man. Well, Amsterdam's a good place to be if you're into food and if you're into travel.
Mm-hmm. Good springboard.
Yeah, but all right, we're going to start at sometimes the simplest questions have the hardest answers. In the context of marketing, what is content?
Well, I mean, content is everything, right? It's everywhere, it's everything. In the context of marketing, traditionally, and this is what we're trying to move away from, I guess, but traditionally I think it's probably, people think of campaigns and, product content and stuff they can put on their e-com sites. I think that's probably a slightly antiquated way of looking at it nowadays, especially as we move towards Web3 and a whole new world of doing things. So yeah, traditionally it's probably, campaign content. It's stuff you put on your website, stuff you might put on your adverts, on your billboards, etc. But from a more sort of future thinking point of view and moving into the world of content strategy, it's way beyond just marketing content. And I think often content strategy is confused for being marketing strategy, and they're kind of different things. So yeah, that's kind of my immediate take on it.
Cool. And how are they different? Does content sit, is it a little bit underneath marketing? Marketing's the umbrella term, or do they sit completely separately and sort of overlap?
I mean, I'm biased, so I would say content sits above all. It's like the one to rule them all. I mean, they're intertwined, of course they are. They're part of a bigger puzzle and a bigger picture. What we're trying to do and what me and my team try to do is flip stuff on its head. So people sort of think of campaigns and UI design, UX design, all that sort of stuff first. But I think we kind of need to, rotate things a bit and actually put content as the first piece in this jigsaw. So if you start with content, you're actually going to be producing better marketing materials, better design experiences, and better journeys for customers. So yeah, it's going to need a bit of a sea change. And, the en vogue thing is to let's design first and then we'll put the content in last. Dead against that. And I think the more people can sort of start moving towards a content first approach, design with intent frames, make it real from the off, then the spheres of marketing, user experience, sales, they'll all benefit from that.
Interesting. And I've seen this in one of in my research I've done, where you did mention content first. And the way you described it there was, instead of having placeholders, have real content and design from that. I guess there's probably a reason that it hasn't been done that way to begin with, right? Like perhaps you don't have the content locked in, and that changes the flow of how you might design. And so, how's your team doing content first design, and how has that changed? I guess the workflow and the time to be able to release stuff, because I imagine that would sort of change stuff around in that sense.
Yeah, you're right. It's not been the way it's been done. It's not been the norm. It's not been the most efficient way of doing things. So we are pretty different in that we've actually got a team of content designers. You also hear of them as sort of UX writers, but it's more than just writing. It's a bigger practice. So there's a guy called John Collins, not the dictionary. He's an Atlassian architect, and he outlined 4 kind of disciplines or spheres of content strategy. So we had content design, content strategy itself, content operations, and content engineering. Within the design sphere, it's all about sort of understanding the user need and then curating and creating content that meets that need. So if you start from that, and you start with a human-centric approach, then you are potentially able to flip things on its head. Of course, designers aren't always happy to wait around. It's a bit of a small team. It's not the done thing. But if we can show the value in doing content design up front and helping everyone else in the chain, as you will, to sort of understand that, then I think it's going to change the way we do things. But it's new, and people aren't used to things that are new, and they take time to adapt, and they're stuck in their ways, and they feel comfortable doing what they're doing. So it's not an easy battle. I can't lie about that. It's pretty challenging at times, but we're pushing content design or pushing content strategy. That it's taken us about a year in this team to sort of get people to understand it. Like content strategy is a fuzzy term, right? It doesn't really mean anything. But I think having those 4 disciplines or 4 quadrants helps you kind of understand it as a bigger entity. I often speak to people and I'm like, give us the content strategy for this. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't work like that. You can't just go, apply this, insert here. It's not like that. You've got to kind of analyze and understand, and then you can come back with recommendations. It's kind of like a consultancy role, but you're doing it at an enterprise level.
Interesting. And so those 4 pillars, it was design, then
strategy, then operations, and then engineering. I mentioned at the top of the call, I worked in sort of governance and controls and things before. That's where the sort of content operations thing kind of comes back around for me, because content itself needs to be governed, it needs to be curated and organized. So that ultimately came back to my new life. Engineering, something I've worked in a lot, because it's sort of organizing the shape and structure and how you apply the content. So that's the systems, the CMSs, the DAMs, the PIMs, all the sort of back end stuff. And then the strategy, which is the overarching, but also one of the 4, is taking all of that, taking a bit of a helicopter view and working out how you can apply it and meet the user need from a higher level, more systematic and sort of business driven, relating back to all those fun things like OKRs and all that.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, you use a lot of terms which people may or may not know, like DAMs and PIMs, but you talked about structuring content. And in my research, I came across you were talking about how journalists, and I ended up reading, I think it was a Wall Street Journal article on structured content and how I guess they do structured content and how we might start adopting it in business. So yeah, perhaps touch on what structured content is and how you use it at your role in IKEA.
Absolutely. So structured content, well, we've spoken about content being, kind of everywhere and everything all at once, right? And Structured content is essentially that. It's taking elements of content, making it modular, making it atomic, making it reusable, and then using those little elements or atoms or components, or fragments. People have got different names for them, but they're all kind of the same thing, more or less. Taking those parts and making them more malleable and flexible and reusable elsewhere. So right now, when you think about content, you generally, at least in terms of e-commerce, you generally have a web page, right? And it's one big page and everything's in there, and that's great. It's all there. You can find what you need, and that's all fine and well. But in the world we're living in and moving to, people don't want to consume things that way. They want it to be smaller. They want it to be reusable. They want to be able to find it where they are, rather than having to go to a web page or through a campaign landing page and then journey through the site and then get to the bit they want. If you make content structured, you can, instead of making them come to it, you can take the content to them. So it's kind of, again, I keep talking about flipping things on their head, and maybe it's going to make people dizzy, but that's kind of what we need to do is find a way of making the content more reusable and bringing it to the consumer and the human where they need it, rather than making them come to find it.
Cool. And if we could cement this, because until I Googled it and saw an example, I was like, what does it mean? For an article, or actually for, say, a footwear product, what might that mean? Because for some people, we work with a lot of footwear companies, some of them just have like just a page and it just pulls in a description, but it's just everything is just in there. And so you can't pull out anything meaningful. There's no proper metadata. So for something like a footwear product or a furniture product, what does it mean to make that piece of content structured?
Yeah, good question. And there's definite similarities across all e-commerce, really, and any sort of products that you're selling. What I will say, first of all, and credit to the product realms, the teams that own the product information, the PIMs I mentioned earlier, their content and their data is structured. It does have metadata. It is tagged. It's organized. Because if it's not, then your website ends up being a real mess, right? And you're selling one product on the wrong page, and you're just going to drive consumers around the bend. So that's a good start, and that's already usable. You're seeing that. You mentioned Google. You're seeing that in real life now. Whereas when you search for a product, you get the little product tiles, the shopping filter on Google search, right? That's pulling it. So the structured content that exists for products is being pulled to the Google search page and presented to you, rather than you having to go to the company's page to find the product, right? In terms of the bigger picture, you mentioned descriptions, installation guides, assembly guides, bullet points around the benefits and features of a product. Generally, most e-com sites at the moment are, like you say, just putting that in a big dump of content, a big dump of information that can't be extrapolated. If we take all those elements and extrapolate them into a content model, which is kind of the pieces of the content in that page, you can then take parts of that model. So say you just want to give somebody the overview about why this is a cool product or the history of the product, and that slice can then be surfaced on a product listings page, or in a CRM email, or in an article that somebody's writing about that product that's outside of your own company. So it's taking those pieces and, again, making them reusable and having them as chunks of information, treating content like data, so it can be pointed to, right, rather than being this big slab of just monolithic information.
I wonder if this might be a business in its own right. Is there a tool within the DAMs or the PIMs which can take unstructured content and, using AI, turn it into structured content? Is that something you're seeing? We'll get into proper AI stuff later, but that seems like an easy place for it.
Yeah, you think? I haven't really seen it done yet. To be able to do it, the AIs need the content to be structured in the first place in a way. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg, right? So they probably can take a pass at it and scan through a lot of information and say, well, these are logical breakpoints. They could potentially use SEO schema that's already on the page to kind of see where some of these chunks are. But yeah, it's not being done yet. I've been trying to look into, can you use AI to make content models? And I haven't found one that's doing it yet. So you're right, there probably is a business in there that no one's quite cracked yet. But if people don't understand the value of doing it, it's much cooler to create an AI that's going to, write your essay for you, or create some weird and wonderful art, right? You'd rather do that than something practical, because this is like a practical AI. And many AIs are kind of more fun-based. So it's probably around the corner, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, fun-based, i.e. not that useful. And then practical
Yeah.
is like, all right, let's...
Yeah.
Um,
I'm hoping businesses kind of get onto it and start. I mean, I know a lot of businesses have got their own sort of machine learning teams and AI teams and stuff. So I'm hoping they kind of tweak some of this and it becomes more prevalent.
yeah, for sure. Because I'm thinking, like, how big is your team? Because one of my future questions will be, what can a retailer with 3 people in marketing, and they might be doing 10, 20 million in e-com revenue. They just had 3 people, and it's like, well, what could they implement? So I guess first, tell us about your team, and then my follow-up question will be, all right, for someone with a marketing team of 3 people, how can they think about content strategy? And perhaps it's too onerous for them to get into structured marketing, but what are some easy wins that might be available?
So we're part of experience design. Content strategy doesn't really have a home. It's weird, it's kind of lived in different marketing teams and design teams because it's still a fairly new discipline. It is sometimes a bit of an outlier in terms of the org structures. We are sat in experience design though, which I think is a good place to be. We can influence back into the design teams, but also influence out into the operational teams and the business teams. We are classed as a center of expertise. So there's a bunch of teams that are sort of domain focused, focusing on checkout and, different features within the site. Whereas our team is more horizontal and we span kind of everything and everywhere. It allows us to go out into different conversations with different people and kind of break down some walls and break down some barriers. We're blessed in that way, but it also means as a fairly small team, we're also cursed because we can't be everywhere all the time. We need to be cloned, which, I mean, they can do it, but I'm not sure how ethical it is to clone humans yet. So we are 3 principals, myself, my colleague Moira, who's focused on taxonomy, my colleague Timmy, who's focused on sort of content structure, and then our sort of coordinator, manager, Sarah, and then underneath Sarah, we've got 2 people currently who are kind of trying to operationalize the things we do from a strategy point of view. So it's a fairly small team. And then on the other side of the team is the UX writing team that I mentioned earlier.
Okay.
And they're about 6 or 7 people with a leader as well.
Well, cool. Well, that is definitely content first then if effectively half the team is UX writing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's epic.
It's
cool.
And again, they are spanning everything and anything, like any kind of project. If they can get their foot in the door, they're in there helping. But as you can imagine, it's a big company. There's a lot of projects going on, and that team of 7 soon becomes pretty small in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, well, that's epic. That means that when there's a really high demand, you got 7 people, and if they're all being used up, and it's like, cool, let's expand the team and make content first, even more content first. What does it mean to make content sustainable? I've heard you use that phrase, and often it gets used in more like product stuff. Like, let's make products sustainable. How do you make content sustainable? And how do you close the loop on content? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's the same principle, right? When I was at Adidas, my boss there, Adam, we sort of coined a phrase: single-use content is the same as single-use plastic, right? So it's the same mindset. So you use it once, you kind of throw it away, one and done, basically. Making content more sustainable means kind of 2 things. One is more efficient, therefore more economical. You're creating content with a mindset that, rather than creating it for, hey, we've got this campaign coming up, let's create this wonderful artwork, photo shoots, videos, copy, everything, and we'll slam it on this campaign. We'll probably track the campaign for sales, add to bag, click-through rates, stuff like that. And then, great, campaign's over, archive it, bring the page down, done. That in itself is not very economical or efficient. So that's one side of it. If you make content reusable, you create it with a different mindset to begin with. And this sort of goes on to your next question, I think, around how marketers can maybe change things. Create it in a way that it's designed to be reused rather than designed for an end goal, end purpose, or even just one channel. A lot of teams are duplicating content. The mobile team will create a similar campaign using their own content. The web team will create their own campaign using similar content. Create it in a way that it can be used across channels and across sort of time frames and time boxes. And the other side of it is the sort of more traditional version of sustainable, which is, make it reusable, make it cleaner, make it more conscious, I guess you could say, and have it as a real sort of like ethos. You can live sustainability the same way you can live things like inclusivity. You've got to kind of live it and believe it and breathe it and prove it, and it becomes the way, right? Rather than a sort of, that's a cool idea, but we've got our way of doing things, so thanks but no thanks.
And how is that? Because you said it with the roles that you have within the team. There's like, you got to get the taxonomy right and the content structure right, and that's all the technical stuff to make sure that the content that you're creating is universal, so it can actually be used in all these places. How do you kind of bridge that organizational change to make sure that two teams? I mean, Google has this where they'll have 3 teams come up with 3 different chat products, and they're all not great. Whereas, like, you could have just made one. You could have just been talking to each other. So perhaps that's not even within your team, but I guess it is a problem that you would need to solve. So how are you going about solving this problem?
Yeah, even if Google are getting it wrong, then you can pretty much guarantee everybody else is getting it wrong, right? So yes, we do experience sort of parallel streams, parallel projects, parallel products. As a sort of design realm, and especially a center of expertise in content, we have to kind of steward and shepherd and advise. We don't necessarily own anything, so we can't say to the product teams, "What the hell are you doing? Don't build that. Like that's crazy. You've already got 3 of these, planner tools, or 3 of these compare product tools, or something like that, right?" So you can't just walk in there and say, "You guys are nuts. Stop doing what you're doing." But what you can do is try and bring people together. And generally we found, and I've certainly found that, if you do find out there's sort of parallel streams going on, when you do bring people together, for the most part, they're like, "Oh, actually, yeah, we probably should be talking more, and we should be, carving out bits that work for us and work for you. And maybe we can be more effective if we do join forces on this project, or maybe we can say, well, look, we'll be responsible for part A and you guys will cover part B." And it becomes more of a collaborative and a collective effort. But yeah, big enterprises, you can't keep your eye on everything. As I said earlier, we are cursed and blessed with our tentacles everywhere. You just got to give people the dots to connect and hope they kind of pick up on it and work with it. You can't herd cats, but you can certainly put some treats down, and hopefully they'll come running.
Nice. Yeah, I imagine big organizations are different beasts, and if we scale it down to a small organization, again, someone doing say 20 million online, so they might have a team of marketing of like 3 to 5 people. I've seen teams as lean as that. What are some easy wins that they could be doing in content, and to put it more, to give you more parameters? Maybe, they have an e-com presence, obviously. They're pretty good on e-com product structure. They have an Instagram account, which they probably reuse stuff that they'll do, I guess, a brand shoot every season. Say they do 2 seasons a year, so they use that for the catalog, and then they reuse it for Instagram. So they're at that level, and they're using it for their retail stores. Like, what are some easy wins that might be available? Say we take you out of IKEA, we put you into this retailer. What would you do?
Well, in a way, if they're already working with those structures, they're already halfway there because they are already reusing content. I think the core thing that you need to do is look at the process. Well, there's the 3 Ps, right? And there's various 3 Ps, but the one I always come back to is people, process, product. In a smaller company, you are slightly more lucky or able to do things that are more organized. From the process point of view, if they're creating content that they're already reusing, the best thing they can do is start early in terms of making sure it's tagged, making sure it's organized, making sure it's structured. And, off the bat, when they brief in for it, brief with the tags, make sure you've got the right information attached to that content. I'd assume that in that scenario, there is some tagging, there is some organization, but the stricter and more robust you can get with all of that, the easier everything else becomes. And the sooner you do it in the process, that's the big thing. Do it early, right? So I mentioned earlier about content being kind of the last thought in a lot of people's minds, but get it right up front, and that benefit will flow down the chain to everybody else, and everybody else consuming it, depending on whether they're in retail or in in web commerce or anything else. Also, if you do that, this is kind of getting into the product side of it. You can then feed into automations, right? And having automations will then allow for the people to have some freedom to be more creative. They're less hamstrung by deadlines or budgets or anything like that, because you're kind of giving them time back to be able to do stuff that's actually going to add benefit to the customers. I remember a really lovely quote someone I worked with at Adidas said to me once. They said, I'd love to be able to let my teams use their heads over their hands, because they were constantly just firefighting, getting shit done, and ultimately they were losing creativity. So I think, I'm fairly unversed to the world of smaller business. I've been pretty much in large enterprise my whole career, but you kind of need those opportunities in a small business, because you do have to be all hands to the pumps. And the more you can kind of make efficiencies in the way you process things, and you use products to help supplement your work, and that then helps the people, coming back to the third P, it just lends itself to a kind of better way of doing things. So I think, I'm hypothesizing, but I think they're probably better off in many ways, because they can be a bit more flexible around that, and they can own what they're doing. That sometimes gets lost in a bigger enterprise.
For sure. And thinking back to my experience when I was at a small retailer, a lot of what I was brought in to do, I was like, well, I can just automate a lot of this because I have software engineering background. And then, you free up your time. And so I guess my advice also, having worked at a small retailer for the smaller retailers, listening would be, look at the processes that you're doing and the stuff which is really using your hands and not your head, and being like, okay, well, I'm doing this thing 10 times. How can I reduce that to just doing it once and then just automating it? And then, you get time back, which is really your biggest asset.
Exactly. You cannot make time back. You can make more money, you can make more creative, but time is, it's finite.
Awesome. One way people are getting time back is ChatGPT, right? Like that's so yeah. Where do you see AI generated content playing in this content space, and how? Yeah, let's start there.
So ChatGPT, I'm for it in terms of innovation. I think it's epic what people are already using it for. If we're to focus on that side of generative AI, then the copy side of it. The way I think it'll work the best is, as you probably know from using it, and people watching this will know, it needs prompts, right? You said you've been an engineer, so you get that, right? You've got to give it some code to kind of work with. These are human language prompts that anybody can use, right? As opposed to code that you've got to feed into a machine, so it makes it more accessible for everybody. In terms of using it in business, it would actually help us be more content first, because if you're a small team of content designers and UX writers, you've got to manually create that copy for whatever project or whatever campaign. If you're able to lean on ChatGPT and get it to create the copy, then you've instantly got more content to go into the designs earlier on. It's the same for generative AI that does imagery. It may not be the end image that you shot in the studio or done in your campaign shoot or whatever, but it will be something similar that at least feels right, and you can get a feel for how the content's going to be and live when it actually goes live. If you, just going back to the UX writers, the content designers, if you allow them to design the prompts, so instead of them designing the language and the copy directly, they design the prompts to allow the machine to design it. But it makes sure that in doing that, it retains the tone, the voice, it retains the brand sort of feel and look, and it frees them up to have more time to, like we said earlier, be more creative and work on more projects. So there's benefits to it. There's drawbacks. My concern over it, and that people aren't talking about this too much, is it's great. It does cool stuff. It spits out essays and reams of text and reams of information, and it's pretty on point, right? But are you going to put that live on your site? Is anybody governing that? Is anybody curating that? Are you happy for a machine to just spit that out and publish it to your consumers? We've seen some horror stories, right? Some of the AIs have got pretty mean already. So, it's the same way that we need to govern content as humans in the current process, which not everybody does because it's hard to manage it all. The AIs and generative things like ChatGPT will need to be governed as well. So it's a rock and a hard place for me. It's great in some ways, but hugely worrying in other ways. Not in terms of worrying of taking people's jobs and stuff like that. It's worrying in terms of, are we actually thinking about this long term, or are we just jumping into it because, oh wow, this is epic, like it does loads of cool stuff, and hey, look, we've got it done, and it feels great, it feels fun, but longer term, like the strategy around it, I think we're probably lacking that. So I'm interested to see. I mean, fall's coming pretty soon. I'm interested to see how people start using it, professionally, not just writing stuff, but as a business sense, using it to create stuff and then putting that through governance models. You'll always need the humans to govern it, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the next step for me. It's all great being shiny and fun, but in reality, like, especially if you're in financial services, somewhere like a heavily regulated industry, maybe in e-commerce it's slightly easier, but if you're in a heavily regulated industry and you're letting a ChatGPT pump your content out, it's a dangerous game. You can get sued pretty quick, and the money you saved on humans not doing it, you lose back in court cases. So yeah, we should see.
Cool. And so that you mentioned sort of governance, is that, like, how do you think about creation versus curation? Does that prompt any thoughts in your head?
There's a bit of a theory that the only good content is new content, right? It's got to be fresh, it's got to be new, it's got to be shiny and exciting. And we generally get sucked into that. We mentioned campaigns earlier, right? You create a new batch of campaign imagery, a new batch of campaign copy and everything else, assets and things, and that gets spat out. So again, you're creating is not efficient, it's not sustainable. In terms of curation and content maintenance, again, it's the less fun side, exciting side of things, but I think you need a blend. It's duality, right? You need to have new stuff coming through that can supplement, but you need to make better use of curating and reusing your content. So it's easier to lean into the fun stuff and the new and the exciting and the shiny, but there is a lot of value in curating and maintaining your content as well. So it's often the last thing people do. Like I said, you create stuff, it gets put out, and some stuff just gets left up on the site forever. Some stuff might get archived. Some stuff exists out there. I mean, the BBC, at least they've owned it. They said, look, here's the old BBC site. Like, it's already old content, and you can tell it's old because they haven't remastered it or anything. But if you just leave it out there, you kind of get like content rot. If there's no curation or maintenance, then stuff can go out of date pretty quickly. That's another reason why you kind of need to be smarter and have smaller chunks, right? So you can fix the chunk at root and then propagate that out to other places, and it will be updated. So if you've got 20 different pages with one piece of content, you're going to fix it once rather than fixing it 20 times. Therefore, you can curate and you can maintain better.
Interesting. A few thoughts came into my head. One was around like reach. When I think to one of my favorite podcasters, Andrew Huberman. Have you come across him? The science podcaster. Man's changed my life. But one of the things he always talks about is, so what he does is he's a ophthalmology researcher out of say Stanford School of Medicine maybe. He's got like 10,000 citations, so he's like a proper researcher, but he's also a fantastic communicator. And so one of the things he really talks about is getting like 3 things you can do to make your life better. One is like wake up in the morning, look at, like, stand outside and be in the sun. And that's one of his key pieces of advice. And I see a post on it every month from him because it's just that important. And you'll post something and maybe 10% of your people will see it. And so if it is something which is like a killer piece of content, you want to reuse it because you're almost doing a disservice to your followers or your customers or your guests, because not all of them get to see it that first time round. So, hey, reuse it because that's like, it is an epic piece of content and everyone should, I guess, have the opportunity to see it. Does that resonate?
Absolutely. Yeah. We've kind of defined 5 principles in our team for content. So we talk about it being reusable, right? Modular. But the principles around that is that it's suitable for personalization, it's suitable for collaboration and automation, but the reusability and trackability elements also come into play. So yeah, if you've got it in that chunk that you can reuse, you can track, you can collaborate on it, it can become a talking point for another piece of content. You can personalize it for another user at another moment in time, and that's all done via automation. You've kind of got the perfect formula. So yeah, it definitely resonates. And you'll have to ping me his name so I can look him up.
Sweet. Yeah, I'll send you some of my favorite ones. This
Nice.
is great. I remember, I mean, I only watched it an hour ago, the Oatly commercial and how they're just reusing, the like, you put this on a billboard and then you have a woman sing a song about it and then you put it,
Yeah.
then you put it on Instagram. I can totally do that with this podcast and that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, it's the way forward. Honestly, that is sustainable content. You are being way more efficient. Your return of investment is better, and it's just better overall. Something we didn't touch on earlier, actually, when you spoke about how do I describe sustainable content? There's an element of it that's also storage, right? If you're storing duplicates of assets and duplicates of web pages and other pieces of data and information, it's putting a strain on servers, which in turn is using energy. And like, if you can take one piece of content and use it in 20 places, it's saving the planet in a way. It sounds kind of crazy to say, but it's kind of saving the planet and it's all going to be small steps and little things like this that actually make the difference. It's not going to be, stopping flying because people aren't going to stop flying. But if we can do little things like that save a bit of energy, which save a bit of the planet, then it all adds up, right? So yeah, that's something I forgot to mention earlier.
That is true sustainability in that sense. How should I'm thinking about, I mean, when you were saying that, I was like, fuck, I've got a bunch of logo files which aren't big, right? But there's like some older ones, some new ones. I go try to find it. I'm like, oh crap, I clicked on the wrong folder. It's all in G Drive, which starts off organized and then like doesn't stay that organized. If again, I'm a retailer, I'm just using Google Drive. I mean, some businesses were still on until COVID happened. Were on a server in their office, and like you had to not even TeamViewer or some older system in just to access your files, and then some of them are now probably on Google Drive or whatever Microsoft version is. What's the next step up? Like you mentioned, DAMs, PIMs. Where are some like easy places that we could start to centralize our digital assets?
Yeah, I mean, even going further back, I remember when I first started at American Express, they still had the big metal filing cabinets, stuff in them, documents, and we were getting faxes in, and I was like, what is happening here? Anyway.
Oh my God, wait, hold up. Just on that, like, I can't believe I've only just realized this. But you know how you will have like digital versions of things, or you'll get a millennial, maybe you'll get a Gen Z who clicks the save icon, and they're like, what's this fucking save icon? Like, I've never seen this almost square shape before. And of course, people our age and older, they're like, well, that's a floppy disk, and you would save it onto a floppy disk. I've just had that moment on computers, we have folders, and within folders, we have files. And I just never had connected the dots that those used to be physical folders and physical files.
Exactly.
So thanks for that.
I was hopefully it hasn't upset you. I was dealing with a solicitor recently, and this solicitor, she's really old school, and you'd email her, and she sort of print out the email and then post stuff back to you with the printed email. It's just, what's happening? What is happening? Am I going insane? But she's good at her job, but yeah, very old school way of doing things. What was the question again? So how are things going to change? Storage. Well, I mean, in terms of content, I think the big change we need, and this isn't just like content, this is everything, I think, in terms of how we organize ourselves. So I mentioned, pages being sort of monolithic pages of information, but behind the scenes, you've got all the back ends, right? And the back ends are often pretty monolithic themselves. Even somebody like Adobe, you think of Adobe as the creme de la creme, right? And they've got the best products, and so their salespeople tell you, and they've got all these wonderful things that do all these magical things. But even the product they were using, Adobe Experience Manager, that was a monolithic product. So in the same way that we're breaking content down into smaller parts, I think technology needs to change to work in the same way. So every place I've worked, I text them of like, we've got to reduce the amount of products, we've got to save some money, and we've got to do this, that, and the other. But actually, I think what we need is more products. And when I say products, I mean capabilities, I guess, or services or microservices. So where I'm going with this is the Mac model. I don't know if you've heard of that at all.
No, could you elaborate on that?
Okay, so MAC is an acronym. Acromania is still running the world. It stands for microservices based, API first, cloud driven, and headless. So what I was referring to just then was, instead of having this big product that sort of is a big suite that does everything and is owned by Adobe or any other big brand, you actually end up with a lot of little microservice products that do a bunch of the same stuff. But again, just like the content needs to be, they're malleable, they're flexible, they can plug into different front ends. They are headless in that respect, and they're just a back end, right? Mm-hmm. When you think about creating content, you always create it generally with the front end in mind. But if we go back to structured content, you're actually creating it front end agnostic. You're creating content in a raw format, and this is going to be pretty chilling for a lot of marketers because they want to see how things are going to look, right? They want to see, well, if I create this, then I want to see what the consumer sees. But actually, we kind of need to move to a world where we're creating content that doesn't look pretty anymore. The holy grail was make your content pretty, right? You had WYSIWYG editors, you had WordPress, like that was the way we had to do things. And now it's kind of coming back around where we're breaking it down into smaller parts again. So you're having tools that are complementing each other. So you might have a microservice that's, content as a service. So it's picking out elements of content and providing them through, or anything sort of as a service that's able to be a microservice that enables this Mac model. So it could be a tiny little thing doing a little job, but you combine that into an experience platform and an experience layer, and it creates this wonderful thing that the marketers couldn't have created with their original CMS or anything like that. So it's coming. It's more composable, but again, it's a very different way of doing things, and it's a little bit scary because people are so used to creating things the way they used to.
When you think about future proofing, and IKEA will be around for hundreds of years potentially, and so when you're thinking about future proofing, you want your content to outlive any one system. Like I have a friend who's very well read, but he stores he stores his notes in text files, because he's like, these text files, you can read them in anything. You can read them on a Mac. You can open up on Google Docs. So if Google goes down, I still have all my text files. It can easily be read. And when you think about building content systems which will last forever, 100 years from now, IKEA might be like, hey, we want to pull in some stuff we did from 100 years ago to show how far we've come. Look at this table, which actually we've kicked for 100 years because it's just that timeless, versus look how this is transformed. Like that would be impossible if they had folder files, but if they've got content which is which doesn't have a head, and it's just back-end content which can move, because the front-end system will change, as you move into the metaverse, you can have that content coming in. That longevity and future proofing, that's epic to be able to do that.
Exactly. And it will, I'm glad you mentioned the metaverse, it will power that, right? It'll be content that, when I said reusable content earlier, I think most people probably think of, oh great, we'll reuse it for web, we'll reuse it on the app. Maybe we'll put it in some screens in store or something. But really, really, truly reusable content is this raw stuff, text files, JSON files, if you want to use those, that can be, channel agnostic and experience agnostic, and will last the test of time, because it will be malleable and usable for anything. So right now I kind of think about copy you're creating for your website and your product description, like we were talking about earlier. But ideally, even in a current sort of future facing use case, you'd want that same copy to be consumable by Siri or Alexa or any of the other voice assistants, so they can then read that back to the consumer, right? So rather than them having to come onto your site and get the information, they could ask their home assistant, and the home assistant will tell them the same information. So we're not even really doing that yet, I don't think, as an industry. So that's the kind of next step. And then, that same content could then be reused in the metaverse, because the front end is completely different, but it can still consume it in a way that can be layered into the experience layer and delivered, repeatedly and differently. And it becomes infinite. It becomes long lasting, infinite. And it's just a totally different way of thinking about things.
That's epic. I really hope people listen to this and change the way they're structuring their content, because 40 years from now, they'll be like, thank God we did that, because now our system, people re-platform every 5 years anyway, so.
Yeah, exactly. Most platforms have a sort of 5-year lifespan, right? I was a product owner in the past, and generally your aim is to complete your product, right? You make it as good as it can get, and then, oh shit, we better retire it now and get a new platform, because it's kind of how it works. So if you're creating things in a way that is independent of that final final platform layer or experience layer, then it changes everything. It really changes everything.
That's epic. Now that I've said the word metaverse, let's have a chat about it. I guess, and you're uniquely placed to talk about it, given your experience at Adidas and now at IKEA. I think an interesting place to start would be this digital twin. Like I think there's legit, when people play, like some people really get into The Sims. Like I only ever played it on mobile, so I could do like fishing and very limited house design. But I know there's like IKEA packs you could download to make your house in the Sims world. It's really just a matter of time. Like Sims needs to jump on the metaverse ASAP and like sign a deal with IKEA, and then when you buy a table, you get the digital twin and you can put it into it. But yeah, how are you thinking about the metaverse at the moment? Is that the most practical place for a business to start? I know the hype has sort of died down as NFTs kind of blew up after the gold rush, but no doubt it'll be back because there is some genuine merit to the space. But yeah, love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think it's going to come back. Peaks and troughs, right? I think we're in a bit of a trough at the moment, but that doesn't mean it won't come back. This is very early days for all of that. I'm glad you mentioned IKEA metaverses and Sims and things. I can't remember who made it, but there is a metaverse out there where someone sort of made a metaverse game based on IKEA. It's not endorsed or official or anything. And the game is you kind of got to escape the store and get out through the maze. Yeah, it's not an official product.
That's why it's not endorsed.
The interest is right. Yeah, right. I mean, personally, I always look for the shortcuts. Top tip: look for the shortcuts and navigate your own way through. But yeah, it's a big opportunity. I mean, IKEA was one of the first brands to bring AR, right? They were the first brands to be able to have an AR filter and put stuff in your home. And that was probably a decade ago or something. It seems mad to think that it's that old, but everyone's kind of doing AR now, right? I mean, you guys are working on it. It's fitting shoes to your feet and putting on virtual try-on and things like that. But we've already got a whole bunch of assets that are designed for an AR environment. You could take those assets and stick them straight into a metaverse. Or, you could, instead of coming in and sitting with an advisor at a desk, you could go online or even get a headset on, right? And sort of plan your kitchen or plan your new PAX wardrobes, virtually. So I think there's a lot of room for things to change and grow. I know the metaverse as an entity is still going, and there's some really cool events. That was the Metaverse Fashion Week recently. That was really cool. But I think the middle ground, or maybe the more immediate future, is probably more around that mixed reality rather than the full immersive metaverse. We've got another center of expertise in our group that are called Strategic Experience Design and Research, and they're kind of looking at this stuff, and we're working very closely with them from the content center because we can see the parallels. We need to help, like we said just now, shape the content so it becomes future-proof for these new experiences. But we've been working with them we're brainstorming like mad. We've been having some amazing sessions, but we've been looking at sort of things like, can you have a sort of scale of is this a word? Immersivity. And it's kind of like, we keep talking about really old school stuff. I'm going to show my age a bit here again, but do you remember on stereos you used to get, and you get your equalizers and you could mess around with your settings, and if you're a DJ or anything, you probably still know about this stuff, and you can change your levels, right? And we're sort of thinking about ways of, well, how do we empower a consumer to change their level of immersiveness? Like, how immersed do they want to be? So you can kind of sign up, get in your customer profile, and you toggle these sort of levels of how immersive do you want things to be. Do you want them to feel like virtual reality? Do you want them to be sort of animated? Do you want it to feel like real life? Like all these different sort of nodes of immersive experience. And rather than just saying, hey, here's the IKEA metaverse, go into it and explore, consumers can kind of say, well, the experience I want is actually semi-VR, semi-AR, and you can kind of personalize the metaverse or immersive experiences to that consumer rather than saying, hey, here's a virtual world, go and explore it. You can deliver them an experience that works the best way for them. So yeah, we're exploring it a lot. I've got a session coming up with my peer Paolo over there, and we've been having great fun looking at toys and how toys have changed and how kind of different experiences now exist. Like there's a teddy bear that's like an AR teddy bear, and you can kind of treat him when he's sick and like operate. I mean, it's like the old game Operation when you pull the bones out of the body. But it's all based in AR, and we're sort of thinking of ways of could you sell children's furniture with a QR code in it where the kids get to scan it and a little dinosaur playset comes out on top in AR, stuff like that. So, I mean, the possibilities are endless. We've got a few thoughts and wonderful, weird and wonderful ideas. But I mean, it's so exciting. It's just so exciting. And like you said, it's early days. It's a bit of a trough, but people are going to really start getting into like what's the business value, and that's where the fun's going to really start.
Yeah, that's going to be epic. And you talked about, I guess, building for the future. It's hard to. This is going to sound dumb. It's hard to predict the future, right? Like it's if you could, would be even know if we'd be happy. But anyway, you can't predict the future, but you can sort of future proof, and that's a little bit what we've been talking about. It's like, hey, build yourself the structures such that whatever happens, you're well placed to take advantage of it. Because if the future arrives and you're like, okay, well, we need to build this stuff, it's going to take us a year or two to build out the stuff to take advantage of it. You've missed the boat. So yeah, any other thoughts on how do you try to predict the future? How else can businesses sort of future proof? Because hopefully any business listening to this now, they want to be in business for another 20 years, and the next 20 years are going to look pretty different.
Yeah, I mean, the pace of change is just bonkers. Like it's really hard for businesses to keep up with it. It's a little bit like data. So you get a report, right? And as soon as you get a report, that data's out of date because you lock it in at a certain time period. If it's a dashboard and it's real-time data, right? But if you're just dealing with reports, that data's out of date straight away. And it's kind of similar to that, in that you're trying to keep up with things before they happen. I think it still comes back to being more focused on, at least from a content point of view, creating it in a way that is that raw format. It becomes future-proof because you're not designing in a way that's for an endpoint. You're not designing in a way that's for a channel or a particular consumer at a particular time. You have to design in a way that's agnostic, and that's how you future-proof. Because otherwise you are, in the same way as the data reports, you're locking yourself into a particular look and feel at a particular time, and before you know it, that look and feel's out of date. It's like they say, you buy a new car, it depreciates as soon as you drive it off the car lot, right? So how do you compensate for that? And I think being more sort of raw in your creation rather than purposefully creating for an endpoint will allow us to future-proof, hopefully.
Awesome. And just to bring it back to the people who matter, which is the users. I was reading a book by wonderful friend Alex Genov, who's at Zappos. He's an amazing user researcher. And his book's all about, it's like, hey, you've got all this data, or in your case, you've got all this content which you're making and building a strategy for, but you don't want to forget that at the end of it, there's an individual person. There's lots, at any given, like there's lots of individual people, but it's like only one person is looking at it sort of at a time. And like, do you think about that, and how do you take that I guess individual person into account when you think about content?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something we think about. We try to be very human centric. It's the sort of core of what we do in terms of our design. It's an interesting one because everyone's talking personalization, and personalization exists in its current form, but I mean, a lot of the time it's just product recommendations, which isn't really personalization. It kind of pisses me off that people class that as personalization because it's not. From a content point of view, if you're making your content flexible, then you can. So there's sort of one-to-many and one-to-one, and that sort of product recommendation stuff is kind of one-to-many, really. I see some really interesting stuff on things like Amazon where, you've bought a particular product and somebody else has bought another product that you've bought, but then because they've bought something else totally random, you get recommended their totally random thing that you don't actually want, but because the algorithms are seeing that you bought the same thing originally, you must want the other thing that they've bought, but it means nothing to you as a consumer. So I think content needs to be smarter in terms of avoiding stuff like that. It needs to be more contextual and more focused on the one-to-one rather than the one-to-many. And again, if I keep harping on about it, but if we create it in a way that it can be modular and reused, then you can deliver that truly personalized, one-to-one human experiences that people need. And if we create in a way that allows that, then we'll avoid those really jarring experiences like the Amazon example. Like, I think I bought the same book as somebody, but then they ordered like, I don't know, a Stairgate or something. And it's like, well, I don't need a Stairgate. Like, I'd rather have a similar book, or, you know, something sort of relevant. So it needs to be relevant. And I think if we tag it and we create it in a way that is reusable, the relevancy and contextual nature will remain.
Awesome. Cool. That's all the formal questions I had. I've just thought of one now, though, is if there are probably some CEOs listening to this, if you could, on behalf of the content managers at those businesses, if you could get the CEOs to sort of understand something, because often, you know, they are the ones which can help drive the business in this direction. What's like a message that you would want to deliver to them on behalf of, you know, people thinking about content and content strategy?
Good one. I'm trying to think what I've complained about that might be a good thing to choose. First, I know Bill Gates said content is king many years ago, but it doesn't really crack it, right? Put your content first. Put it at the heart of everything. You know, design with content in mind. Really see it for the value it has. You know, I think we're too quick to, like we said earlier, just create it once and chuck it out the door, or just sort of leave it to rot. I think really understand the value of your content, and in turn, that will then drive value for your business.
That's epic. And this has been a fantastic reminder for me as well, because after this, I'm going to go back and look through all the content we've created and not reuse. And it's not too late to reuse it, because a lot of the stuff is timeless. So I'll absolutely be doing that.
Nice. I look forward to it. If you want me to review anything, let me know and I'll have a look at it for you.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us, Bryn. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure a lot of people will benefit from this conversation.
No, pleasure's all mine. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Awesome. Dope.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The StrutFit Show. I've been your host, Nayyar. And if you enjoyed it, if you found some parts where you were like, this has added some value to my life, then please share it with a few other people that you think would also value this information or that snippet. And when they like it as much as you did, I'm sure they'll thank you. If you're interested in what we're doing at StrutFit, head to our website at www.strut.fit to learn more and get in touch with us. If you want to get in contact with me directly, you can reach me at ang@strut.fit. Alright, that's all folks. Till next time, take care.